You have some new recordings that have just come out. One is a collection of Mozart Lieder. You're so well known for your interpretations of Baroque music. How did you approach the Mozart, the classical period?
Well, I don't think there's a big difference in my technique that was needed, although Mozart's known for being one of the most difficult writers for every instrument, not only for the voice. The Lieder aren't that technically demanding, but they are, I think, very, very interesting and rarely performed. It's not we think of Mozart as an opera composer, and so we know his opera arias very well, and what was fun for us in making this recording, that is with Colin Tilney, was that we were able to look through the whole opus of Mozart Lieder and choose many, because we had a long amount of time to fill. And of the ones that are popular, the ones that people know, you can count them on one hand. The Violet, Das Veilchen, Lied der Trennung, maybe Abendempfindung and Ankloy, maybe one more. Yeah. And that's all. Most people include a few Mozart Lieder maybe towards the beginning of a Lieder recital, and then let the rest of it go. So what was fun for us was looking at some of the earlier ones and doing the two French ones, which are very nice, written in Mannheim.
It's interesting. I noticed the Kirkel listings. Most of them are fairly late in his career.
That is true. Even so, that's curious. You mentioned that because we had the impression, I think, of recording early Mozart Lieder, the ones that weren't well known. And the interesting thing about them is that a great number of them are strophic. Even the late ones are strophic, which means to say that the same music is repeated to a new text, kind of like a hymn setting, where you sing new verses but the same music. And he verges on the romantic, almost Schubertian in several of the Lieder, namely, Als Luise die Briefe, we really hear the sounds when Louisa threw the letters of her unfaithful lover into the fire. Basically, that's the translation of the first bit of text of the piece. And she's addressing the song to the letters. She's saying, "You, the unfortunate burnings, you represent fire, the fire of my heart and the fire of the love, and now you are going to return to the fire, namely real fire." And you hear, I think, her throwing the letters in the piano part, and the flames licking at the paper. It's very Schubertian in its capturing of the text in the piano part. Similarly, it's true with Der Zauberer, which is Haydn wrote a song almost exactly the same way. This text, Der Zauberer, the magician, warns women to stay away from this guy because he's got magic tricks and she doesn't know what happens to her when she gets around him. She just falls under his spell. So anyway, in that particular one, she seems to have maintained control to be able to tell other girls about this cad, as it were. In the Haydn song that's called Die zu späte Ankunft der Mutter, which is on the same idea. That one means mommy came too late. Mommy came running but arrived too late. In that one she says, "Mommy, you can go away now. It's already done." in the Der Zauberer, which is a great companion piece of Mozart, of course, she's managed to maintain a little bit of control. Another really romantic Lied is Das Lied der Trennung, which has that kind of churning Alberti bass almost that one thinks of with Schubert as well. So that's another one that's very forward-looking, I'd say.
And of course, as you mentioned, Das Veilchen, the Goethe song, that's one of the most beautiful pieces by Mozart.
Yes, it's really wonderful setting. People smile when they hear this piece because the text is so ingenuous, I guess is a good word for it. It tells the story of a little Violet who has been in love with this country maiden, and all he really wants in life is that she should press him against her bosom. And he gets all excited because he hears her footsteps and she's coming, and in the piano part you can hear the kind of German pigtail their music. I don't know how to describe it any other way. It's just very jolly and very happy and bouncy. And then she does. She approaches him, but instead of plucking him, she steps on him. And as he's dying, he says, "Oh well, at least she stepped on me." And It's just this charming kind of quality.
With typical Goethe irony.
Yes, exactly right.
Tell us about the song Die Alte, where you use a slightly different voice.
Right. Maybe went over the edge with that. I don't know.
No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
In any case, it's the age-old statement of the previous generation, which is namely, they don't make it like they used to, they don't do it like they used to, things are out of control these days, and young people better watch their step. They're going to go to wreck and ruin, you know.
And we're talking 1780 or so?
Correct. It's the same old stuff that every generation passes on to the grandchildren somehow. And that's what's going on here. I think it says girls marry too young, and you don't have to know much of the text to imagine what's going on.
Well, the sound of the voice, you imitate the sound of an old woman with the voice. It's a wonderful quality. It provides a real variety from what we've heard so far, and some of the beautiful singing and beautiful songs, and then all of a sudden here comes this sort of comic showpiece, and it's a wonderful balance to the set.
Yeah, Mozart helps you out. He says, as opposed to moderate or geschwind, which means fast, the only indication he gives about performing the piece is ein bisschen aus der Nase, which means a little through the nose. So you can't sing it straight, and I figured if he's already telling you how to change your tone quality, might as well go for Baroque. So that was my theory.
Now, in this recording, you're being accompanied by forte piano rather than a modern piano. Tell us a little bit about the way you sing with a forte piano as opposed to a modern piano.
Well, I'd love to say just a little bit about the piano itself. First of all, the hammer, the part that hits the string, is about the size of a garden pea. It's teeny tiny. If you imagine a normal piano hammer, which is 2.5 to 3 inches long, and all that felt that goes underneath, the actual point of contact is very, very small, which means that the Mozart piano, one can hear much more clearly than, say, on a modern Steinway or Bösendorfer, different ranges, different registers. That's what the word I'm looking for. So you'll hear the bass register sounding different than the treble and the middle register. It doesn't sound like an evenly produced. I don't know why that is acoustically, but it doesn't. The Mozart forte piano also doesn't have the kind of string tension that a modern piano has to have because of the heaviness of the wire. So there's no steel plate in it. It's very light to move. It requires tuning, just like a harpsichord, at least once a day, if you're going to have a high-quality tuning. But it means that the attack is very precise. The tone dies away rather quickly, which means that you can sing a true pianissimo with forte piano, something that if a modern pianist tries to do on a modern piano, like a Steinway or Bösendorfer grand, they can't really get the notes to sound because you can't play it that softly. It's almost impossible to play it that softly, as soft as the kind of pianissimo. And also just the tone quality of the modern piano interferes clarity-wise. It's just less precise than a forte piano can be, which means that diction is much more easily accomplished. Clear diction is much more easily accomplished with a forte piano than with a modern piano. Also, just in terms of the power that it requires to play the forte piano, I think the key dip, that's how far the key goes down before you hear the note, is much, much smaller. In other words, you have to breathe on the forte piano and the note plays. Whereas you've seen modern pianists really put their whole weight, the weight of their body into playing the instrument because they need to. The key dip is lower, the power required to play it is much more, and it's much more finesse, elegance, and detail is possible on a forte piano. Not to say that the modern piano doesn't have its, you can't play Chopin, for example, or, the forte piano can't do what you need for Beethoven and other things. So, but for Mozart, it's fantastic.
One of the pieces on this collection is, in the English translation, Evening Reflections of Laura, which you said is a kind of a little miniature opera scene. We call it Abendempfindung. It's one of Mozart's most popular lieder.
And there are little sections of recitative style interspersed with this serene melody and a kind of almost atmospheric quality to the writing. Also, among those that are less well known, Sei du mein Trost, which is K391, and Das Traumbild, the dream, the picture in the dream, or that is that's a rough translation anyway. But both of those pieces are very reflective of the court of Frederick the Great and Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. They're strophic songs, and they have qualities of chromaticism and of a movement in Germany at this time that was called Empfindsamkeit, which is the sensitivity style. They're descriptions of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach as he played the clavichord with weeping and intensity. So there was this kind of immersion of the performer into the effects of the music, and that was the point. There were supposed to be lots of powerful emotions coming from the music that were affecting the listeners. Thus the sensitivity style.
You have a lovely new Christmas recording that just came out. Tell us a little bit about some of the pieces that you recorded on that.
We started making this recording. The recording is with the Aulos Ensemble as a result of performing around the Christmas tree at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's medieval courtyard. Every Christmas they have performances there, 2 or 3 in a day, and we were performing there and thought it would be terrific to make it into a CD. And among the things we were performing is Alessandro Scarlatti's Christmas cantata. I think it's called Cantata Natale. And there are several recitatives and one wonderful Siciliano at the end. The Siciliano is a dance in 12/8. So da 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 da. And if you think back to the Messiah, Come Unto Him is a Siciliano. And actually there are a number of pieces in that first Christmas section that are. There's the orchestral prelude that's also Siciliano, and that was a dance, as it were, that was evocative of the simple folk, namely the shepherds, and it was thought to be played on loud instruments such as shawms and bagpipes and recorders and simple instruments, folk instruments. And so the Christmas cantata of Scarlatti ends with such a Siciliano, as do many, many Christmas pieces of the time, because it was thought to be these adoring shepherds and the simple folk, and them playing their pipes, and that whole image is evoked. And I think for that reason, Baroque composers write, Baroque, not just composers, but people who are writing treatises say, don't ornament the Siciliani very much, because it's supposed to be the music of the simple folk, and they didn't know about high-class ornamentation. Right. So there is that quality to it, too. And it begins with a lovely prelude, followed by an aria with first an aria with one violin, and then an aria that has 2 equal parts.
That is such a beautiful section. That middle aria is just one of the most wonderful Christmas pieces ever.
It's haunting and melting at the same time, if you can do both of those things.
And what else is on the recording?
We have a set of Bach arias, Süßer Trost, mein Jesus kommt, which is Sweet Comfort, my Jesus is born. And it's a lullaby piece for the Christ child. It has this almost arabesque quality in the flute. The flute is the main obligato instrument. It's incredibly, it's just not of this planet. It's kind of off in space, if you can imagine, swirling and twirling around. And the voice provides a kind of nice melody to a very simple string accompaniment with oboe da caccia, I think. String accompaniment that creates the sense of lullaby. Once again, it's kind of a Siciliano, a 12/8 kind of setting. Also, we're doing some Christmas carols. We do the Coventry Carol, the Wassail Song, also some French carols, and some a Neapolitan carol as well. So we're kind of touch on carols of various different nationalities, and also maybe the well-known to many people, Lule, Thou Little Tiny Child.
Is that's a traditional English melody, is it?
Yes, I forget if it. I think it may be called the Coventry Carol. I haven't looked recently, but I think that is the Coventry Carol.
So this is a nice collection between composed music and traditional folk Christmas music, then.
Right, it's music to evoke the period, the time. A recording of mine of Handel, Sirowe, which is one of the later operas that he wrote, has just been released. It's interesting in that it is pretty much a series of da capo arias, one after another. There's not much to break it up. The plot is really Verdian in its, in all of the machinations and the evilness of mankind and the various things that go on. It's really quite a murderous plot. And interestingly enough, Handel wrote the opera for two rival sopranos in London at the time. Cuzzoni, who was a soprano, a very, very clear high voice, and a very tiny figure, had suffered from smallpox as a child, not particularly attractive. And Faustina, who was Hasse's wife, mezzo-soprano with a very penetrating, clear voice, liked to sing in the keys of E major and A major because her favorite note was E above a C, that is an octave and a third above middle C. And so the opera has this very interesting quality of having exactly equal numbers of arias for the two prime donnes, as it were. And
probably equal bars, too.
Well, it's pretty much that way. They eventually, their clacks eventually got so vociferous and noisy at one performance that the two ladies turned upon one another and had a sort of a hair-pulling event on the London stage, which stopped the opera cold, as you can well imagine. But Handel was very, very careful to write equally for them. So when one gets a fast aria, the other gets a fast aria. When one gets a beautiful slow aria, it's matched in kind. And you almost feel as though your Beckmesser ticking off the one after the other. And so there's a very interesting quality about the opera. It also meant that Handel had to really make it up because Sirowe, as it's originally written by Metastasio, only calls for one prima donna. He had to make the other part, which was kind of a lady-in-waiting, into a primary player. So the plot gets a little bit screwy in order to accommodate the singers. But that's nothing new in the 18th century. The other recording that I was speaking about a minute ago is pretty well known to opera lovers. It's called La Serva Padrona, Pergolesi, and is considered among two, the other piece being Stabat Mater, of his greatest masterpieces. It is a typical intermezzo in that it involves two characters, and the opera that is the Serva Padrona, the intermezzo, was partitioned off in between the acts of an opera seria. This little burlesque, or intermezzo as it is, pits Serpina, that means little snake, against Uberto, who is her guardian. She's been with him since she's been a small child. They basically love one another, but no one's admitting it until she exasperates to the point where he says, "I'm going to get married," and she says, "But wait, I've been thinking you loved me." They finally work it out after a small amount of tomfoolery. But it compares very, very interestingly with the Telamon Pimpinone, which is kind of the same plot, but so much more nasty is the relationship between the two. Pimpinone is an old Burgermeister. I mean, he's a good town businessman, and he's made his money honestly, or maybe dishonestly, by fleecing the good people of some small German town. And this hussy, who's been a cleaning lady for a lady in town, has just been thrown out on her ear, and she's looking to marry and make a little money thereby. So she fools the old guy into marrying her, and then eventually they just come to blows. Her saying terrible things like, "How could you expect me to share your hated marriage bed?" And him accusing her of talking behind his back and going to the opera and gossiping about him, and et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't have the kind of sweet ending that the Serva Padrona does, but it is an interesting comparison, mainly because I've done both of these together with my colleague John Ostendorf, and it makes for fun listening.
A little later this season, you're coming back into town to sing another concert, once again with the American Bach soloists. And when does that? That's in March sometimes.
I believe it's the first week in March, around the 7th, it seems to me, we begin rehearsing. And it's always a pleasure to sing with this group. They have such vitality and sense of authenticity and, well, the sense of performing the music and being willing to take risks with it. It's one of the things I like the most about them is they remain authentic in their choice of instruments without getting stodgy and bookish. The music's really alive in the hands of that group and with its very eminent conductor, Jeffrey Thomas.
And that's in St. Stephen's Church again in Tiburon?
I believe it's being performed several places, but I'm sure that they won't vacate that wonderful spot. So there'll be performances there, and I think also around the Bay Area.
Well, please do come into town whenever you can, because it's always such a pleasure to hear you sing.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking today.